Meanwhile, President Trump's team is preparing to roll out its plan for tax reform. The White House is working hard to make sure its tax plan avoids the same bumps as health care, according to a new report from Axios. And now a top Republican is promising they'll get it done by Christmas. Take a listen.
What most people really want is some form of tax cut. You think we'll get that?
Absolutely, before Christmas.
That was Chuck Grassley speaking now. Here now is former economic advisor to President Reagan, Art Laffer. And Art, you know that the most cautious man in the Senate, he's from Iowa, after all. If you're not cautious, you're not from Iowa. But he is very cautious. So for him to say we'll have tax cuts this year, I was kind of impressed by that. Were you?
I was, but I was more impressed with Jason Chavis's green tie, just like mine, David, which, by the way, when you have two people on back-to-back with no fashion sense, you've got some risk there at the Business Channel, by the way. I just thought I'd mention that.
Okay, but let's get back to taxes, which you like even better than green ties.
I think he's right.
You think we'll have it this year and it'll be retroactive to January 1?
As long as they keep it simple. They've got to keep it simple and make it the corporate tax rate reduction, drop the 35 to 15, do nothing else, and bang, you've got the economy taking off. That's what they need to do, not make it some complicated behemoth that will always have people falling off and not doing it. Just run it right through. I know many of the Democrats would love to see this happen, even though they won't vote with us ever.
By the way,
but they would like to.
You wrote a piece last week. It was with our buddy Steve Moore, who's now with an evil network. We don't even want to mention the name of his network, but we still like Steve, suggesting that governors, that state governors and mayors should be lobbying in favor of this. I would say to that suggestion that goes totally against the rhetoric, the class warfare rhetoric of a lot of the Democratic mayors and governors, don't you think?
It does. It goes against their rhetoric, but they're just arguing against their own citizens' self-interest, and that just makes no sense whatsoever. What happened if the growth rate under Obama had been the same as it was under Reagan? All right, the same growth rate under Reagan, only under Obama's term, the state and local governments would have $581 billion more per year in 2016 alone, a 25% increase in revenues. That would take care of all sorts of problems. Even Illinois might be able to balance their No, I'm kidding about Illinois.
Well,
but
no, maybe. Who knows?
I
mean, listen, states and cities have come. Look at Pittsburgh, the way Pittsburgh came around once they opened up their doors to business. Finally, Jamie Dimon last week was talking to some of his cohorts in the financial service industry. He was saying it's also their job. It's not just job of politicians, but some of the chief business and economic and financial advisors in the country should be lobbying hard for this. Let me just play a soundbite from that and get your reaction.
Unfortunately, people write about this thing like it's for corporations. It's not for corporations. Competitive taxes are important for business and business growth, which is important for jobs and wage growth. And you know, honestly, we should be ringing that alarm bell, every single one of you, every time you talk to a client.
Quick reaction, Art. Go ahead.
He's totally correct. In fact, if there's one tax rate reduction that's guaranteed to bring in more revenue, it's the corporate tax rate reduction from 35% to 15%. And Jamie's right. Every single American in this country should be lobbying Congress to vote for that bill and get it done right now and passed through and signed. It would be the elixir that we really need to jumpstart this economy. It would be huge. State and local governments, we'd have secondary, tertiary tax, no more sheltering, no more tax evasion. All of that stuff would drop, and we'd have a boom like you wouldn't imagine.
Okay, so President Trump was on the campaign trail yesterday. I mean, that's basically what it was. He went over to Missouri, and he gave a speech about taxes. Now, a lot of people on the left were very upset about this notion that that Trump was talking taxes in the middle of the hurricane. I know people on the right did some of the same stuff with Obama. Do I think it's a huge deal that he made a speech on taxes in the middle of the hurricane? I don't. Do I think he should have delayed it? Probably. It seems like a little, not untoward so much, but just it doesn't seem like great timing. If you want to make headlines about taxes, don't do it in the middle of the worst natural disaster, in one of the worst natural disasters in the history of the country. But do I think it's a huge deal? I really don't. Trump demonstrated some of that fabled empathy that the media says he has none of in his speech in Missouri. Here's what he had to say.
I was on the ground in Texas yesterday to meet with Governor Abbott, who is doing, by the way, an incredible job, and local officials so that we could coordinate the very big and unprecedented federal response. In difficult times such as these, we see the true character of the American people, their strength, their love, and their resolve. We see friend helping friend, neighbor helping neighbor, and stranger helping stranger. And together, we will endure and we will overcome.
Okay, all of that's fine. I don't see a huge problem with any of that. And, of course, everything that he is saying there is fine and good. There are people saying he seems insincere. I hate this kind of analysis. I think it's really dumb. This kind of stuff where it's like, oh, we're going to read his brain. Okay, there's not like a huge amount of stuff to read there in any case. The idea that we're going to sit around reading, his emotions on Hurricane Harvey, I just find absolutely asinine. Okay, and then he gets into the real tax reform talk. And I'm going to explain what I think is right and what is wrong here. He says that this is the opportunity to deliver real tax reform, and he's committed to working on it.
So this is our once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver real tax reform for everyday, hardworking Americans. And I am fully committed to working with Congress to get this job done. And I don't want to be disappointed by Congress. Do you understand?
Okay, so he's ripping on Congress, which is fully his prerogative. I think that it's actually not a bad thing for him to be ripping on Congress. McConnell and Ryan didn't get the job done on health care, but once again, what you're going to see is that Trump is running into some serious problems here because he doesn't know specifics and he doesn't care about specifics. Just as with healthcare, he seems to be laying out these broad guidelines and then suggesting that Ryan and McConnell have to hash them out themselves. They've proved themselves incompetent at that. That means that Trump actually has to get his hands dirty. This is the problem with having someone who legitimately is not only not a policy wonk, he doesn't even have a bunch of people who surround him who are real policy wonks on taxes. Like, who's going to pitch this thing? Jared and Ivanka? Who's going to pitch this thing? Steve Mnuchin, who was a Democrat until 5 minutes ago? Gary Cohn, who's still a Democrat, as far as I know? So some of the stuff that he says about taxes, I think, is correct. I mean, he talks about getting rid of loopholes and complexity. He talks about lowering the competitive tax code. This is clip 4, where he talks about getting rid of some of the upper tax brackets on corporate tax rates.
Second, we need a competitive tax code that creates more jobs and higher wages for Americans. It's time to give American workers the pay raise that they've been looking for many, many years.
Okay, so again, that's about right. I mean, everything he's saying there is correct. We do have some of the highest business rates among developed nations. It's the average business tax rate has fallen, as Trump says, from 45 to 24% in developed nations, and we are at 35%. Corporations pay a lot less than that in their effective tax rate, but that's because they're doing what everyone does. They're taking every deduction. They're moving jobs offshore. They are moving their money offshore. They are reverse merging with companies outside the United States. They don't have to pay American tax rates. So yes, we have to do all those things. He talks about his sort of theory of how we're going to bring about economic growth with tax cuts. Here's clip 5.
We will lower taxes for middle-income Americans so they can keep more of their hard-earned paychecks, and they can do lots of things with those paychecks. And that really means buying product ideally made in this country.
This is a theory that's often put out about tax cuts in general to the middle class. First of all, the middle class is not the hardest hit bracket by any stretch of the imagination by taxes in the United States. It is the upper class that is hit by the top tax brackets. They are destroyed by the top tax brackets. The top 5% of income earners, let me look up the exact statistics. They pay, I believe, something like 30% of all taxes. The top 1% is according to CNBC, not exactly a leftist source, a right-wing source. The top earning 1% of Americans pay half of federal income taxes for 2014. Okay, that's a pretty astonishing statistic. They will pay 45.7% of all individual income taxes in 2014. That is up from 43% in 2013 and 40% in 2012. The bottom 80% of Americans are expected to pay only 15% of all federal income tax. So the idea that it's the middle class tax cut that boosts the economy is not true. What boosts the economy is people who have money to invest in the creation of new products and services, actually doing that and creating jobs. Right? We here at the Daily Wire have created an enormous number of jobs. Why? Because we have funders who are billionaires who decided to invest that capital in building a new company and trying to generate more profit. And in generating that new profit, that has made people who work for the company more wealthy. It's made people who work for the company more employed. All of this is how economics actually works. No one has ever worked for a poor person. It doesn't work that way. You don't get hired by a poor person. Even middle class people, it's good that they should have more money in their pocket that they earned. just as a moral principle. But the way that economics really moves forward, the reason you have better products and services for the same dollars you used to spend on an iPhone 3, you're now spending on an iPhone 7, is because there are people at the top who are actually directing those funds toward investment, not just directing those funds toward the buying of things, right? There's actually a Keynesian view that Trump is espousing there of taxes. And Trump is using the tax issue to stump against Democrats. Here's Trump bashing Claire McCaskill, who's the senator from Missouri.
So we have no choice. We must lower our taxes. And your senator, Claire McCaskill, she must do this for you. And if she doesn't do it for you, you have to vote her out of office.
The problem here is that Trump is not really going to take a leadership role with Congress, which is what he needs to do. He was elected on the back of the idea that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are untrustworthy. They need to be led around like dogs with a leash, okay? They cannot be allowed to run the show. And yet Trump has basically abdicated and said to them, you guys handle it and I'll just go out and stump for it. I don't think that's going to work here. I don't think that that's going to be an effective tactic. There are a bunch of people who are Trump supporters who are upset with him that if he's going to use his political capital, why is he using it on tax cuts in the first place? Ann Coulter has been going after Trump very hard. She says this is a tone-deaf speech. Why is he paying attention to Wall Street? Why is he paying attention to all of this? We'll explain why corporate tax rates need to come down in a second. But a lot of his base is not particularly concerned with this. And Republicans in Congress, it's a question as to whether they're going to get this together. Senator Mike Lee from Utah, he said, listen, if we don't get tax reform, we're dead. Of course, Republicans had been saying the same thing about Obamacare repeal, and they didn't get that either.
The American people elected us expecting us to repeal Obamacare and bring about tax reform. We haven't repealed Obamacare. If we don't get tax reform done, we're dead. We might as well fold up our tent and go home.
Okay, well, they keep saying that, except for the Democrats continue to suck at their jobs, so it almost doesn't matter what Republicans do in any of this. They can continue to stink at their jobs, and nothing major will happen. Now, what's interesting is that the Democrats, in stinking at their jobs, have come down along two lines. One version of the Democrats, they say, let's hold our fire. Let's keep our powder dry. Let's wait till Trump makes a big boo-boo, and then we can jump on him with both feet. And the other group of Democrats are the people who are still rabid over the last election, and they are interested in tearing down Trump every day. Dianne Feinstein, who's a much more clever Democrat than most of them, she's my senator out here in California. I think she's a garbage senator, but she's a clever woman. And here's what she had to say about President Trump that kind of shocked her own constituents when she was doing an event out here in California.
Look, this man is going to be president, most likely for the rest of this term. I just hope he has the ability to learn and to change. And if he does, he can be a good president. And that's my hope.
Okay, so she said she hopes he's a good president. This is anathema for a lot of people on the left, but she's smart. By saying this, it allows her to draw distance from him when he actually does something wrong. It sounds like she's propping him up, but she's just going to kick that crutch away as soon as it becomes convenient to do so. This is the smart version of what Democrats are doing. Here's the dumb version of what Democrats are doing. Richard Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, says that he would support Trump, except that Trump's a horrible, terrible, no good, very bad racist.
You had two factions in the White House. You had one faction that actually had some of the policies that we would have supported on trade and infrastructure, but they turned out to be racist. And on the other hand, you had people that weren't racist, but they were Wall Streeters.
Okay, so the idea that all the people he was trying to do business with, they were all a bunch of terrible, horrible racists. Again, it's kind of funny hearing this from a lot of these unions like the AFL-CIO. There are major union issues in the first part of the 20th century, and most of the 20th century, actually, in which the unions would not allow black people to join because they was considered a union against a lot of the freed slaves who were going to swamp the labor market. That's what the union was designed to do, actually. For example, the Pullman car strike in the late 19th century was designed to keep black people out of jobs. So it's funny to hear the unions talk about their lack of racism. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.